All right, so first thing I want to do is we're going to look at a couple of music videos. So, do you guys know who Bob Dylan is? So, Bob Dylan's a famous musician. I've never been personally a huge Bob Dylan fan, but I know he was very popular, and I have a friend that's a real big fan of his. But anyway, so Bob Dylan, he has a certain style, to him, and his voice kind of has a very unique sound to it. Like I said, I was never a huge fan of his voice anyway. But he's got this one song, so we're gonna go. This is a famous video that he had. I'll just play a little bit of this. So basically all the words are on the cards and stuff. See, I think you get the gist of it. Notice the guys in the background. It's kind of... Anyway. All right. So my next question is, are you familiar with Weird Al Yankovic? Yes. So, anyway. Weird Al Yankovic is known for doing parodies of songs and stuff, right? So usually what he does is he'll take a famous song, change the words to it, and make it funny, basically. But another thing that Weird Al does sometimes is that he'll write an original song, but he'll do it in the style of another song or another musician or band or whatever like that. And so he has this one song called Bob, right? And this is an original song that Weird Al did, but it's in the style of Bob Dylan. It's a style parody of Bob Dylan. And he did this video to go along with it. Notice that it looks a lot like Bob Dylan's actual video, but again, it's a different song. So let's watch a little bit of this. Actually, let's watch this whole thing, and then we'll talk about the song a little bit. Those guys in the background are guys from his band as well. Right. So that was going to be my next question. So the first time I ever heard this song, I was thinking, what in the world is this song? What is this about? What's up with these lyrics? They make no sense whatsoever, right? And then at some point, I heard a couple that I had recognized before, like a Toyota's a Toyota, I believe, and maybe one or two others. And I was like, wait a minute, I think that's one of those palindromes, right? And then I started thinking, wait a minute, are they all palindromes? And sure enough, all the lyrics to the song, every phrase, every line is a palindrome, right? So that's the deal with the lyrics. So again, what is a palindrome?
Sentence or phrase that means the same thing whether it's said backwards or forward.
Right. So a palindrome is a word or a phrase that you take it and it's spelled the same forwards or backwards, right? So you take the phrase or whatever. If you were to verse the letters, they would spell the same exact thing. Okay. Now, and so wouldn't it be kind of interesting if you could write a program that would actually test to see if something was a palindrome? Okay, and so that's what this example program is about. And actually, I got this. This kind of is based on some stuff that's in your book. And actually, in your book, back over in chapter 6, they have a little function. It's not a lot of don't talk a lot about it in the book, but over on page 370 of this 8th edition of the book here, they have a function called isPalindrome. And so what I did was I took that and I wrote a program that kind of revolved around that. Okay. All right, so we'll take a look at that here in a little bit in the program code. And also, this program makes some use of the string class function. So we've used strings, like string variables and stuff in this course. If we had to remember what a string is, it's just a collection of 0 or more characters, right? So in C++, the way that strings are implemented is that there's something called a class, called the string class, okay? So really what a string is really just like a one-dimensional array of characters, right? If you think about it, you remember a one-dimensional array is just basically a list of things. So a string is basically a one-dimensional array of characters, and each one of those characters in the string has a position or an index that goes along with it. Okay. But the string class is not just an array of characters. It has some other stuff built into it as well, and it has like a whole bunch of built-in functions that you can use that are operations that are built into the class. And we skipped over chapter 7 here, but actually in chapter 7, that's one of the things they talk about some are the string class and some of these built-in functions. So like on page 496 and 497 of this edition of the book here, what is this again, the 8th edition? They have a list of some of these things. So there's some functions like the at function that it basically returns what the character is at a certain index in the string. You can also access the individual components of a string in the same way that you do with one-dimensional arrays. You can just put the string name and have square brackets and an index inside of the square brackets. But there's other functions as well. There's append functions, where you can append or add on a character or another whole string onto the end of a string. So basically you can add stuff to a string. There's a clear function that basically you can delete all the characters from a string. There's a compare function. There's an empty function. So it returns true if there's nothing in the string, and it returns false if there is stuff in the string. There's an erase function. What else do we have? Find. So if you're looking for a particular character or a particular string, like maybe a part of a smaller string inside of a larger string, you can use the find function. It will returns the index of where the first occurrence of where it finds it, or it returns a special value if it doesn't find it. Anyway, there's an insert. You can insert a string into a particular place inside of a substring or inside of a string. There's a length function, because if you think about strings could be of different lengths, right? Like a string could be nothing. It could be what we call the null string. That's just a string that doesn't have any characters in it. Or it could be a really long string. It could be any number of characters long. It's a dynamically allocated type, basically. So we have a function called the length function that will return how long it is, right? And then there's some others as well, too, and you can read those. All right, so I make use of some of these things in this little program. All right, so let's see here. By the way, I have this program up where you can download it if you want to. In the Blackboard shell, if you go down to, well, I did have a folder called Palindrome program files, but I didn't have the whole thing there. So I put it up under program examples. You click on program examples, added a new folder at the bottom, string processing. You could click on string processing, and there's a zip file there that when you download it and unzip it, you have to unzip it before you can, compile it and run it and stuff. It has the the source code, it's got an input file, and it's got an output file in there. All right, so, but I've already got it loaded up here. So what I did, I took all the lyrics to Weird Al's Bob song, okay, and I put them in an input file. And so this is kind of how they look in as far as the real lyrics and stuff. I also threw a few other phrases and stuff in there that may or may not be palindromes, because we're going to test all these things. All right, so just look at the first one, right? I, man, am regal, a German am I. Okay, so again, that's a palindrome. But how would you go about testing that thing if you wanted to test to see if it was a palindrome? Okay, well, one thing that you might notice is on these palindromes is that we have a lot of extra stuff. It's not just characters, right? Like this one has a comma in there, it's got a hyphen in there, and also there's some other things that we might have to deal with, right? The boundary between words is not the same on both sides, right? So here there's an I and then a space and then man, space, am, but over here it's I. It starts off the same, but like German, that is different, right? So there's the word. The breakup between words and stuff is different, okay? There's also a mix of uppercase and lowercase letters within each one, right? So when we go about testing this to see if it's a palindrome, before we can really test to see if it's a palindrome, we're going to have to deal with some of that stuff and kind of clean it up a little bit. Because what we eventually want that to look like is something like we'd want it to look like this, probably all the same case, either uppercase or lowercase. So if you wanted it to be all lowercase, that's what we eventually want it to look like. Just the letters, with no spaces or anything in there. And when we get it to that form, or that point, then we can test it to see if it's a palindrome. Okay? So keep that in mind. But let's go ahead and look at the code. The first thing I want to do, let's go ahead and look at the tester function. Okay? So once it gets to the tester function, we're assuming that we will have it in that all just letter form with no spaces or hyphens or anything like that. Okay, and so this function actually tests to see if the phrase is a palindrome. And this, I got this from the book. Okay, so the name of the function is palindrome. It returns a boolean, so it's going to return true or false. So we want it to return true if it is a palindrome. It's going to return false if it's not a palindrome. Okay? And I'm going to send in a string. I named it test string. And that's what we're going to test to see if it's a palindrome. Okay? All right. And so the first thing we do, you notice this variable, we have a variable named length, because again, the string could be of any various length, right? So the first thing I need to do is figure out how long it is. And so that's what this does. Length is equal to teststring.length, open and close parentheses. So that's going to call this built-in length function that is built into the string class, and that's just going to return how long the string is, how many characters long it is. Okay, and that's going to be assigned to length. And then I've got this for loop structure that is basically going to go through one character at a time and test to see if the character on in the first half is the same as the character in the second half. Okay, and so we don't need to go through the whole string to do this. We just need to go through the first half of it, right? Because we're going to be looking at the first half and comparing it to the second half. So the loop I keeps track of the index or the position of where the character is. So we start that at 0 because the index is in the string starts at 0, just like a normal one-dimensional array. So I is equal to 0, it goes up by 1, I plus plus, and the test is I is less than length divided by 2. That does integer division. So that's only going to go through the first half of the string. Okay. So what is it testing? It's going to test, basically, if the letters are not the same, it's going to return a false, meaning that it's not a palindrome. So if test string sub I, so that's looking at a particular character in the string, if that's not equal to test string sub length minus 1 minus I. That's how we do that. So the length is going to be how long it is. We subtract 1 because the index of the last position is 1 less. Remember, the indexes go from 0 to 1 less than the size or the length. And then minus I will tell us how far in we're going. Right? So compare the character at spot I to length minus 1 minus I. That's the one inside. And every time we go through this loop, it's basically going to be working its way in towards the middle, comparing characters. And if it finds two of those characters that are not the same, if they're not the same, then it's going to return a false and end the function, meaning that it's not a palindrome. Okay? But if it gets through that entire for loop structure, and it doesn't, and this is never true, meaning that it's not a palindrome, then it must be a palindrome because all the characters were the same. So then it will, after the loop, it will return a true, meaning that it's a palindrome. Right? You probably could have written that a slightly different way, but that's how the book wrote it. So, does that make sense? What it's doing there? Y'all are quiet. So again, it's going to start, right? It's going to compare. Okay, if I is not equal to I, return false. Well, they're equal, right? And it's going to go if M is not equal to M, right? And then if A is not equal to A, if N is not equal to N. So it just keeps working its way in like that, comparing characters. Right. All right, so that's the tester part. That's the function that tests it. So how do we handle all the cleanup stuff? So let's take a look at the rest of the program. So here in main, I have two string variables that I set up. The first one is input string. So that's going to be the string that I read in from the input file, the way that it originally is. So it's going to read in, like for the first line, I'm in and Regal, a German am I. It's going to read in that whole line, just like it is there. The test string variable, that's going to be the cleaned up final version that I'm going to have and I'm going to actually test. Okay. So I do the normal file stuff, declare and open my files there. Palindrome input is my input file. That's just this guy. Oops. Anyway, that's kind of cool. How do I get that back? Not that I need it. All right. And then just test to see if the file can be opened. This is going to output some table headings in my output file. My output file is going to end up looking like this. Okay, it's going to have little headings at the top with phrase and result. So while in file, so as long as there's still stuff in the file, it's going to keep reading stuff in. Get line in file input string. So it's going to get a whole line. It's going to get an entire line and put it into input string. Right, so that's what that does. And then this line is going to kind of reset the test string to the null string. Test string is going to be the version that I'm going to test. So every time this loop goes through, it's going to be doing a different phrase. So I'm just going to kind of reset it to nothing here. This line right here just outputs the original input string to the output file, like right there, before I start messing with it. And then the next line, length is equal to input string.length. So that'll tell me how long this original input string is. And that's stored into length. And then I've got this loop right here. This for loop is going to basically clean it all up. Okay? And so I set up the for loop to go through each character in the original input string. So for I is equal to 0, I is less than the length, I++. So the first thing I did was I converted the character at the particular spot that I'm at, I converted it to lowercase. Right? So you could have made them all uppercase, it doesn't matter, I just chose to do it lowercase. And there's this function called toLower that will basically convert an uppercase letter to lowercase letters. In order to use it, it might be in string. I thought that was in CC type, but maybe it's also included with string. All right. So the way that function works, basically, if the character is already a lowercase letter, it doesn't do anything with it. So what is it actually doing? How could you tell if something is uppercase, lowercase, or whatever? Yeah, so look at the ASCII value, right? So that's how the function, you could write your own toLower function if you wanted to. You could just, the function is going to look at the ASCII value of the character. If it is between 65 and whatever that is, the ASCII values of the capital letters from A to Z, if it's in that range, it's going to add a certain value. I think it's probably like 90, it probably adds like 32 or something, whatever 97 minus 65 is, right? So it's going to add that to basically shift it up to the lowercase letters, because the lowercase letters come after the uppercase letters in the ASCII table, right? But it only does that if it's an uppercase letter. If it's already a lowercase letter, it doesn't do anything with it. If it's a special symbol or a space or whatever, it doesn't convert it. It just leaves it. Okay. So that's the first thing I do. Convert the character to lowercase. And then this line is going to check to see if it's an actual character, right? So if it's a letter, if it's a letter at this point, it's going to be a lowercase letter because I just converted it, right? So it's either a lowercase letter or it's a something other than that, like a space or a special symbol or something like that. So this if statement checks to see if it's a lowercase letter, and if it's a lowercase letter, it's going to add it onto the test string. So the test string is going to kind of build up this test string from nothing. Okay? So the if statement is, and just to show something different, I use this function at that's built into strings. So if input string.at I, that's the location, is greater than or equal to 97, and input string.at I is less than or equal to 122, that's the range for the lowercase letters, then test string.append 1 input string.at I. So it'll take that one character that's at that spot and append it onto test string. But only if it's a lowercase letter. If it's a space or a special symbol, it's not going to append it. And then once I get that, then I can take that. Then I've got a test string that I can that's suitable for testing, right? Then I can set it into my isPalindrome tester function. And so that is what comes next. So that's what this if statement does. If isPalindrome and then send in test string is equal to true, meaning that the isPalindrome function returns a true. If it returns a true, then output palindrome, else output not palindrome. So it returned to false. And so when you compile and run that, you get this. So there's the original phrase, and then over here is the result, right? If it's a palindrome or not a palindrome. So they're all palindromes, except for some of the ones that I threw in there. Chevy trucks are heavy duty. That's not a palindrome. I went to the store. Not a palindrome. My cat ain't no rat is also not a palindrome. And I added a few others. You know, it could just be as simple as something like race car. You may have heard that one before. Or some people's names are palindromes, like Hannah or Bob. That was also part of the joke probably on Weird Al's song, right? The name of the song is Bob, which is itself a palindrome. Here was a famous one about Napoleon. Napoleon, you know, he basically at some point got exiled to this island named Elba after he lost a war basically within England and stuff. So the palindrome was, able was I ere I saw Elba. So that was one that I'd heard before. All right. And just to kind of demonstrate a little bit more, I had a couple of output statements here, these cout statements that I can uncomment. So inside the loop, basically I outputted the input string and then the test string just to see it in action. The input string, remember, was the original one, but at some point when I converted it to all lowercase. So what you'll see there on the output screen is the lowercase version. So there's each one. There's the input string after it's been converted to lowercase, and there's the test string after it got appended and built up. And those are the things that actually get tested. So what do you think? Kind of cool? What's your favorite one? Oh, you like the Napoleon one? That's cool. That wasn't even one from the song. Do y'all know who Lisa Bonet is? I'm just curious. Does anybody know who Lisa? Oh, Jessica does. You know you're getting old when you know who that is and nobody else does. Lisa Bonet was an actress, I guess back in the 80s and early 90s maybe. She was on the Cosby Show. She was one of the daughters on the Cosby Show. She was like the pretty one. You know that all the guys, you know, went goo over or whatever. So, all right.
I always thought the pretty one was the one that married Lenny Kravitz.
Which one? Was she on the Cosby Show?
Yeah.
Okay.
She was not the youngest one, but I guess she was the middle daughter.
Uh-huh.
I can't remember what her name was.
Cool. All right. Very good. Okay, well that's that. So I'm going to end this.